Good morning, everyone. Let us learn the topic of drug-resistant epilepsy today. I am Dr. Asha. Uh, Let us learn this topic. First thing is we need to know the definition of epilepsy. Epilepsy is defined as a disease of the brain defined by any of the following condition. That is, at least two unprovoked seizures occurring more than 24 hours apart, or one unprovoked seizure and a probability of further seizure similar to the general recurrence risk of two unprovoked seizures. Or if there is a diagnosis of epilepsy syndrome, then we can make the diagnosis of epilepsy in an individual. We all know this age-old classification of epilepsy based on the semiology and onset, that is focal onset seizures, generalized onset seizures, unknown onset seizures, or unclassified seizures in which we do not know the onset. These again can further be classified into motor and non-motor subtypes. Coming to the definition of epilepsy syndrome, epilepsy syndromes are a characteristic cluster of clinical and EEG features, often supported by specific etiological findings like structural, genetic, metabolic, immune, and infectious causes. Uh, this is important in terms of prognostic and treatment implications in an individual. Coming to the topic per se, drug-resistant epilepsy, according to ILAE definition, is defined as failure of adequate trials of two tolerated and appropriately chosen and used AEDs, whether used as monotherapies or in combination, to achieve sustained seizure freedom. So, coming to the terminologies used in this definition, appropriate means that the AEDs used for a seizure type should have shown to be have proven efficacy in previous RCTs. Example, ethosuximide cannot be used for focal seizures. It has been shown to be effective in absence kind of seizures. uh, Adequate, for any drug to be told to be adequate, it should be used in adequate dosage and for an adequate duration of time. For example, if a drug which has been started in a patient has been withdrawn due to some adverse drug reaction before the drug could be titrated to its appropriate dose and duration, then it cannot be considered as a drug resistance because it was not used for its complete potential. For any patient to be told to have sustained seizure freedom, the duration required is either three times the longest inter-seizure interval or at least 1 year, whichever is longer. Coming to causes of drug-resistant epilepsy, the most important and most common causes are the structural causes. Other than these, there can be genetic epilepsy syndromes, developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, febrile infection-related epilepsy syndromes, and autoimmune epilepsies. Coming to the important structural causes, which are the etiologies for surgically remediable epilepsies in children, we have tumors like dysamblyoplastic neuroepithelial tumors, focal cortical dysplasias, hemimegalencephaly, HHE syndromes, hypothalamic hamartomas, and hippocampal sclerosis. And all the causes which cause cortical gliosis also lead to structural epilepsies like perinatal HIE, stroke, hypoglycemic injuries, infections, and traumatic brain injuries. Let us learn this topic better with a case, which is our follow-up case. A 13-year-old female child who was previously developmentally normal with smooth perinatal transition presented with abnormal body movements for last 3 years. She had a preceding history of aura, but she could not properly describe her aura. There is no relation of these episodes to sleep. These episodes lasted for 1 to 2 minutes, after which the child resumed her activity again. Their complaint was that these frequency of these seizures had increased in the last 1.5 years. Let us see the video.
ठीक है
This patient had sudden onset right hand picking movements followed by lip smacking and oromotor automatisms. This was succeeded by an effort to get out of the bed followed by excessive salivation and spitting. So, this patient was already on anti-epileptic drugs started from outside. The dosages of these drugs were titrated to their maximum when she came to our follow-up. She was on these following four drugs, but on these also her seizures were refractory. Hence, we labeled her as drug-resistant epilepsy and we started working her up. First thing is we need to localize the focal epilepsy. So let us learn this. For localization of any focal epilepsy, we need to analyze the aura, motor manifestations, sensory, autonomic, and post-ictal phase. So most common site of origin is the temporal lobe seizures. Temporal lobe seizures are usually longer lasting, that is at least for 2 to 3 minutes and may even be more longer than this. These seizures are less frequent and they have a prominent post-ictal confusion and auras are commonly experienced in the temporal lobe seizures. Temporal lobe could be divided into mesial temporal lobe and a lateral temporal lobe. The mesial temporal lobe seizures have an abdominal aura. They produce phenomena like fear, deja vu phenomena, and jamais vu phenomena. Then there can be autonomic features like flushing, tachycardia, apnea, behavioral arrest, automatisms, impaired awareness, and ictal speech can be seen if there is involvement of the non-dominant hemisphere. If there is involvement of dominant hemisphere, then there will be speech arrest. In case of involvement of lateral temporal lobe, there will be auditory vertiginous features like humming, ringing, buzzing in the ears. Patient may visualize hallucinations and illusions. There are certain ictal signs for lateralization. If the patient has early head version and eye deviation, unilateral limb automatisms, unilateral eye blinking, post-ictal nose wiping, all these features point towards the ipsilateral site of the lesion. In cases of late head and eye deviation, unilateral dystonic limb, unilateral clonic limb, and asymmetric tonic limb posturing, all these features point towards the involvement of the contralateral hemisphere. So clinical localization, what we did in our case is as follows. The patient had aura, so it was obviously a focal onset epilepsy. She also had right-handed picking movements, that is automatisms, which localized to right lateralization. Then she had bed leaving behavior, which localized to the temporal lobe. So it was right temporal lobe involvement. Coming to features of a frontal lobe epilepsy, if any patient presents to us, so what all things we see? Frontal lobe epilepsy, actually, frontal lobe is the largest lobe. It has a wide connections with the other lobes. So focal seizures originating over here have rapid and widespread progression. The seizures will be brief, that is lasting less than 30 seconds and occur in clusters. They have a prominent motor phenomena because motor area lies in the frontal lobe epilepsy, frontal lobe as we all know. Then there can be vocalization. Seizures can occur even during sleep in cases of frontal lobe involvement. So in case of primary motor cortex involvement, there can be unilateral clonic, tonic, myoclonic lesions, which may show Jacksonian march as the seizure activity progresses along the homunculus. These seizures are slow spreading. If there is involvement of supplementary motor area, there will be asymmetric bilateral tonic posturing and fencing posture can be seen. If there is involvement of the dorsolateral frontal cortex, there will be early head and eye version. Coming to this sign over here, in this figure we can see that there is flexion of the left upper limb and extension of the right upper limb in this patient. This typically occurs in cases of involvement of supplementary motor area. There is towards the site of lesion, that is ipsilateral to the site, there will be flexion, and contralateral side of the limb will show extension. So in this figure, there is involvement of the left supplementary motor area. Let us see the example of this child. Here we can see that the child is having abnormal behavior in the form of smiling, and he is having some activity in the right upper limb, in which he initially is trying to lift the limb, but then he is having weakness in that limb and it is falling down. So this is tonic activity of the right upper limb followed by loss of tone and weakness. This child also had aura, but he was not able to describe it. So here we localized the lesion to the left-sided frontal lobe involvement, particularly the motor cortex involvement, as she had unilateral activity of the right upper limb. Coming to this child here, we can see that there is a tonic movement and elevation of one arm. Here, if we had seen the video, then we could have identified that the child initially had flexion of the elbow to 90 degrees. Then he developed abduction of the shoulder up to 90 degrees. Along with that, external rotation was there. The hand may be clenched or it may be remain open. Here, the contralateral limb usually is relaxed and may go into tonic posturing after certain time of involvement of the first limb. This is typically called as the mirror to eye sign or M2E sign, because it appears as if the patient is holding a mirror in front of him and looking into the mirror. The head may look at the clenched limb or it may be away from the clenched limb. This has a strong lateralization towards the contralateral hemisphere, and involvement of supplementary motor area in this is the sign of mirror to eye sign. If any child has involvement of the cingulate gyrus, then the child will present with intense fright, screaming, vocalizations, and autonomic signs. The child may have complex gestural automatisms and hypermotor activity, as cingulate gyrus is a part of the frontal lobe that is having the motor cortex. Involvement of the insular cortex produces viscerosensory, somatosensory, and autonomic symptoms. These are the major differentiating features between the frontal and temporal lobe involvement. Coming to the indications for epilepsy surgery, patients with drug-resistant epilepsy and having resectable causative focal lesion identified on MRI. Patients with drug-resistant epilepsy but having a negative MRI, but they have a concordant data, that is on EEG we are able to localize a particular area from where ictal discharges are coming, and on the PET and SPECT scan we are able to identify a hypometabolic region corresponding to the site, and our data is concordant with the clinical and EEG findings, then we may proceed with surgeries in those cases. Epilepsy associated with tumors is also an indication for epilepsy surgery, and children having developmental epileptic encephalopathy with a causative lesion on MRI are also indications for surgery. Before doing any surgery, we have to localize certain lesions. Like here we can see, first there is an ictal onset zone. This is the main zone from which the ictal discharges are arising. This zone can be identified on EEG. There is a zone called as the epileptogenic lesion. This epileptogenic lesion is the physical lesion which can be identified on MRI or any imaging. Then there is a symptomatogenic zone. Symptomatogenic zone is the area from which the initial part of the seizure semiology arises. That is the clinical feature in the initial part of the seizure. What we see is arising due to involvement of this area. Then there is a irritative zone. This irritative zone is that area around the ictal onset zone which produces discharges even at rest, that is when the child is not having seizures. This can be identified during the interictal period. These all zones. Then there is also a functional deficit zone, that is the seizure activity, the ictal focus also spreads to this area. So it is important to remove this area, but by removing this area, the patient may have certain deficits after surgery. So this is the zone which is important for certain functional components of the patient, like speech activity or motor activities. So we need to clearly define all these zones before doing any surgery in a patient, because we need to clarify how much the patient may have deficits after the surgery. So for any patient before surgery, we need to do certain investigations which can be divided into three phases or tiers, called as the tier 1, tier 2 or tier 3 investigations. In the tier 1 or the phase 1 investigations, we have video EEG, MRI, epilepsy protocol, neuropsychological assessment, and FDG PET scan. If we are able to localize the lesion based on these investigations, then we may not go for further investigations. Tier 3 investigations are invasive and not available at all places. So we went ahead with the investigations of our patient. First, we did an EEG of our patient. This is the interictal EEG, which is normal. We could not localize the lesion on or lobe using this EEG. Then we went ahead with a video EEG of our patient. So in this ictal EEG, we can see that the initial onset of certain fast activity is seen in the F8T4 lesion, that is localizing to the right anterior temporal region. After origin of this fast activity here, then there we can see that there is fast activity spreading all over, but the initial onset is in the right anterior temporal region. So by clinical and EEG, we localized the lesion to be in the right anterior temporal region. Then we went ahead with an MRI brain of our patient. Here we can see the T2 weighted images having the temporal cuts. In the right temporal lobe, we can see certain hyperintensities and certain haziness in both these images. This points towards involvement of the right mesial temporal cortex. The MRI was reported to have a likely ganglioglioma at this site. Then we went ahead with a FDG PET scan of our patient, in which they showed a hypometabolic lesion over the same area, that is the right mesial temporal region, and adjacent lateral temporal region was also involved. So our data was concordant. The clinical EEG, MRI and FDG PET scan where data was concordant. So we went ahead with the surgical correction of our patient. So epilepsy meet discussion was done between various different super specialities, and surgery was performed by the neurosurgery team. Right anterior temporal lobectomy and amygdalohippocampectomy with excision of the tumor was done. The histopathological examination revealed that it was a dysembryoplastic neuroepithelial tumor. Coming to the types of surgeries, what we can do in these kind of patients, we can do either definitive surgery, in which we completely remove the causative lesion. There is 90% reduction of the seizures in these cases. In certain cases where we cannot do definitive surgeries, we go for palliative surgery, like disconnection between the two hemispheres. This is done in order to reduce the seizure burden, but the patient is not completely seizure free. So definitive surgeries could be lesionectomy, sublobar tailored resection lobectomy, and submultilobar resections, etc. And disconnective surgeries could be corpus callosotomy and multiple subpial transections. The risks and complications following epilepsy surgeries are present, but these are very less. There is a low mortality rate of 0.5 to 1%. There can be temporary neurological deficits which recover completely over 1 to 3 months. But in cases of major surgeries like hemispheric disconnections, there can be dense hemiplegias which may be persistent. In cases where we cannot do surgeries, like surgical failure, patients not willing for surgery, patients having bilateral independent seizure onset zones, and genetic epilepsies, we can go for stimulations like vagus nerve stimulation, responsive neurostimulator, and transcranial magnetic stimulations. Coming to non-pharmacological treatment options, what we have in any case of drug-resistant epilepsy, we have three things, that is precision therapy, dietary treatment, and epilepsy surgeries. Till now, we have learned about the epilepsy surgeries. So let us go forward and learn about the precision and dietary therapy. Precision therapy is basically done in cases of certain epilepsy syndromes having a particular metabolic defect in which the supplementation of the metabolic enzyme deficient or the particular metabolite produces improvement in the seizure symptoms. Like pyridoxine dependent epilepsy, we give pyridoxine. In folinic acid responsive disorders, supplementation of folic acid reduces the seizures. Similarly, we have biotinidase deficiency, creatine deficiency, etc. Coming to the dietary therapy, we have ketogenic diet, modified Atkins diet, MCT ketogenic diet, and low glycemic index diet. In these diets, basically, there is bypassing of the glucose metabolism pathway. The energy source here is the ketones, which bypasses the glucose pathway and provides fuel for the brain. It is used in cases like GLUT1 deficiency, pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency, Landau-Kleffner syndrome, Dravet syndrome, West syndrome, tuberous sclerosis complex. Contraindications for this therapy is carnitine deficiency, beta oxidation defects, pyruvate carboxylase deficiency, and porphyrias. This is our patient in follow-up. Her surgery was done around 5 to 6 months back. From then on, there is no seizure recurrence, and she is being continued on AEDs. Plan is to taper the AEDs after 1 year. This is our data in which we have 40 follow-up cases of structural epilepsies. Among them, total 7 cases have been discussed in the epilepsy meet. Total 3 cases have been operated, and 2 cases are planned for stereo EEGs. Take-home message is that seizure description and clinical localization of focal epilepsies is of utmost importance. Structural epilepsy should be ruled out in any case of DRE. Widespread awareness about epilepsy surgery needs to be created. Epilepsy surgeries are overall safe and have a predictable post-op course, and hence the patient should be encouraged about going forward with these surgeries. But still, dietary management has to be considered in patients not eligible for epilepsy surgeries. Thank you.